This video is made possible by my patrons on Patreon.
Proster dealing so much damage, they get the kill! Oh, Dizzler is dead, and this is now totally doable. Proster, he goes in, the ultimate being popped off. They might be able to find the kill here. They might be able to burn through it! Space Station Gaming, the 2v3, can they do it? They need to find this Crocodile.
Hello everyone, my name is Ziamaro and welcome to Battlerite Sage. My god, what a day we had yesterday. We all knew the competition would be close, but I think it turned out better than anyone could have imagined. Impact versus Space Station Gaming was probably the best grand finals we could have hoped for. The game was so tense all the way up to the final round, culminating in a 2v3 by Proster and Bloom. Absolutely incredible. I think it goes without saying that every single team that took part played exceptionally. It was very clear just how much SSG and Impact had prepared for each other's playstyles. It was the final everyone was expecting and it didn't disappoint. The grand finals were not without their surprises like the Rukan picks from Vague, but I think the real thing that surprised everyone was the performance from Red Canids. I've been saying for a while that South America might surprise people, but I didn't realize just how good Red Canids would be. I think they've got to be hands down the most disciplined team I've seen in this game so far. Not once did they get greedy and chase kills, which almost every other team did at some point or another. They were constantly forcing the enemy to play on their terms. They had full control over what they were doing the whole time, and as a result, there was only one team who could actually contain them, Impact, which created this weird rock, paper, scissors thing between the top teams in North America, South America, and Europe. Space Station Gaming lost to Red Canids lost to Impact, and Impact lost to Space Station Gaming. If you're confused what I mean by this, here's a detailed infographic provided by 2Lanes. Who knew the regional metas could have such a huge impact? Sorry. And actually, had the order of games been slightly different yesterday, and SSG knocked out Impact earlier in the day, there's a good chance that Red Canids could have gone home with the trophy. I think BPL went on for like 9 hours yesterday, but I was hooked for the entire day. There's so much that I could talk about today, but I just couldn't resist taking a look at the South American wildcard. So, a big part of what made Red Canids so successful was their disciplined playstyle, but I think a lot of people have been looking at their comp and wondering, how can this even work? So, let's take a look at Red Canids' comp and what makes it work. So first, let's take a look at the double support comp. Specifically, Alder, Blossom, and Thorn. And there's a reason why it's these three, which we'll get into in a moment. A lot of people looked at the comp and figured it's probably just the extra sustain that does it, plus the fact that Alder is basically a DPS that can heal. And that's certainly part of it. But you've got to remember, these are professional, top-tier players. This isn't solo queue where people don't know when and how to punish. Quite often, in organized threes, double support just falls behind due to a lack of pressure. I mean, in a straight M1 attack versus M2 heal fight, the damage will win out eventually. So what is it about Red Canids' comp that allows it to overcome this lack of pressure? So first off, they run a lot of CC. Tex was running the extra stun duration on Blossom's E, and his use of it was genuinely second to none. I think he barely missed one all weekend. Ruben was running a Thorn build somewhat based around entangling roots. He took both rights, which allowed him to cast it more often, and thanks to creeping roots, he could spread the CC to enemies who stood near the entangled target when the effect ended. Quite often as well, he would pull the target with his Q near the end of Entangle's duration, making it function almost like Pestilus' Queen recast. It's quite easy to run away from a static AoE, but when you introduce movement into that, it creates some really powerful zoning potential. And then of course they had Alder's EXQ to reflect projectiles, plus his AoE Petrify when they got close. Quite often they would chain CCs together as well, entangle into Boom Bloom, petrify into entangle, and so on. So the CC for sure gave them a lot more breathing room. But the thing is, CC isn't all they had to mitigate pressure. So here's the really interesting thing, and I think it's a really key part of Red Canids' mentality. Buff and debuff stacking. I'm going to talk about one of their other comps in a moment, and as you'll see, this is a running trend in their champion selection. So here's something quite interesting that I hadn't considered until watching Red Canids. If you put a snare on someone, let's say you do it with Jamong's Rain of Arrows, and then someone else snares the same target, let's say Bako with his Valiant Leap, those two effects don't properly stack up. You don't get a double snare effect, and it doesn't even add to the duration. You just get the effect of one, and when the first one ends, if you've still got duration on the second, you'll get the remaining duration on that. However, if you have a snare effect that isn't called snare, it will stack with a regular snare. For example, if Bako uses Valiant Leap and Alicia inflicts Chill, you will get a stacking slow effect. And Red Canids used this feature of the game's mechanics to great effect. And in the case of the double support comp, the stacking debuff was weaken, and I mean a lot of weaken. So first off, you have the true weaken from Blossom's Charged Mouse 1. That reduces damage and healing output by 40%. Next, you have Thorn's Neurotoxin, which makes the Thorn debuff reduce healing and damage output by 20%. And finally, Alder's Dehydration makes his Time Bomb reduce damage output by 10% and healing taken by 20%. I do need to do some in-game testing, so I'm not sure if these stack additively or multiplicatively, but people have told me that it's additive. And if that's the case, if you get Weaken, Thorn, and Time Bomb all on one person, they're going to be doing 70% less damage. That's insane. So when you combine the CC, the sustain from running 2 supports plus Thorn's Husk, and the massive weaken effect, it makes it very hard to find burst windows against this comp, which is exactly what we saw. Honestly, Red Canids comp is just the ultimate anti-aggression comp. You just can't play overly aggressive into it because they'll just shut you down and out-sustain you. Honestly, it's just a very strong and very smart comp. And I would prepare yourself for people trying this out in solo queue. And especially, I would prepare yourself for people doing it completely wrong. Honestly, it's a lot harder to pull off than you'd think. It requires immense discipline, a good eye for punish windows, and it wouldn't work with any 2 supports in a melee. There will be some variance on the comp, but honestly, Red Canids have found an incredible comp and they executed it perfectly. So like I said before, I think Red Canids were the most disciplined team of the tournament. They barely put a foot wrong all weekend. They really stuck to their guns with champion picks, and as a result, it totally took their competition off guard. So let's take a look at another comp that they ran that also seems very unorthodox. The ZANDER Battleship comp. They did actually run this comp with Paloma a few times in the competition, but the ZANDER pick was a lot more unusual. Paloma and Varesh plus another ranged champion is just a really solid comp. And just like with their double support comp, it's based heavily around punishing enemy aggression. If the enemy melee pushes in and you force their defensives, you can absolutely nail them. So when Red Canids picked Varesh, Ashka, ZANDER, I was a little confused. The healing output from ZANDER is nowhere near what Paloma can provide, and her synergy with Varesh is part of what makes Battleship comp work. But one thing that ZANDER and Varesh can do very well together is stack buffs. ZANDER's Hearts buff reduces damage taken by 15%, which you can quite easily get 100% uptime on, or close to it. Meanwhile, Varesh can constantly apply Corruption to enemies with his Mouse 1, which reduces their damage and healing output by a further 15%. These two effects meant that Red Canids were almost permanently taking 30% less damage. On top of that, you also have Portal from ZANDER and Inhibitor's Guard from Varesh, plus Spotlight for some extra burst healing and a cleanse. So those things combined give the comp surprisingly high sustain, even with the lower healing that ZANDER provides. But ZANDER and Varesh have another synergy. Damage amps. Varesh can apply Judgment on enemies and increase the damage taken by that enemy by 15% for 5 seconds. And hey, guess what? ZANDER can also do that. With the correct battle rights, his Sheep, EX Space, and Mouse 2 can all apply Arcane Catalyst, increasing the damage the target takes by a further 15%. So in essence, while the buffs and debuffs are up, the whole team is doing 30% more damage while taking 30% less. This allowed for the Ashka to put out some insane damage while being surprisingly tanky. So, as you can probably tell, Red Canids have put a lot of thought into champion synergies. And honestly, they've put together some of the most interesting comps I've seen in top level play. They were playing stuff that just shouldn't work against the top teams in the world. But with some very smart strategies, they actually pulled it off. Honestly, there was so much that I could have talked about today, but I just couldn't resist taking a look at Red Canids. But if you want me to talk some more about BPL, my answer to you would be...
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know. What do you think in the flesh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Alright, you convinced me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please feel free to subscribe for more Battlerite guides, news, and discussion. If you'd like to help support the channel and get some unique rewards, then head over to patreon.com/battleritesage. And don't forget to check out twitch.tv/battleritesage. Until next time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.